Two more new ones.
Yes.
Oh man, you've been like teasing us all this time.
Yep.
Yeah. So so hello, Joseph. Hi, Suzanne. Hi, Adrian. Hi, Francis. We're still eating. And Jennifer and Bob and Mark and everybody. Hi, welcome. Let's get started. And I'm going to turn it over to Sherry, who's going to say a couple of words, and then we're going to listen to a new Belf.
So this recording, this like last week's or last session's one, I knew it was new, when I saw the eBay listing, and I was very excited about it. But this one, I didn't really discover that I had it, and that until I got the transfer back, and was going through things, and I was very excited to actually hear it and say, oh wow, I have not heard these before. It's an odd recording because both sides are just called Romanian Dance, so that's not terribly informative. So, but I haven't found this anywhere else except in my collection. So I thought, again, this would be another good opportunity to share it with the world at large who's interested in these sorts of things.
Cool. So we're going to listen to one of them now. And like the last time, I'm going to ask that we're going to hold, if you have a piece of paper nearby and you want to make some notes or a reflection about what you're hearing, write it down so that you can remember towards the end of the session, and then we'll listen to the second side, the other side, and then we'll have a chance to like schmooze a little bit about what we've heard. So here we go. I mean, we all know that tune, kind of, but just different enough, right? Cool. Okay, thank you so much, Sherry, for like, it's like so cool to have these new sounds in our ears. And it really, what we've just listened to, I think really speaks to something that we're going to talk about as we go on here. So I'm going to first turn it over to Paul, though. What our format for today is we're going to spend a few minutes, sort of up to about 10 minutes, for Paul and Sherry and Michael to say a few words about a topic. We've been discussing some sort of general themes to bring into this discussion, and so each of them is going to take one of something that they're interested to speak about. And Jeffrey's going to sort of, rather than taking a moment to speak himself, we're going to just go into a general discussion. So I'd like to turn it over to Paul to get us started.
Okay, am I audible?
You
Yes,
are.
So one of the things that people brought up when I did my thing was if I've thought about doing some sort of a reissue, and I know some of the people here have, and I, I said, I don't know what I said, but I'm beginning to think that that's impossible. I mean, if I think for Jewish music, it's one thing, because there's a strong obvious interest, not just in klezmer music, but in Jewish history and so on. And even if there isn't a nation that is, obviously Israel is out of the, well, you could include Israel, but I mean, there's if you get to Romanian music, I mean, you're dealing with maybe in Romania there might be remnants who might be interested in, remnants of recording companies or whatever that might be interested in doing that. But basically it's, I mean, in the past, Dick Spotswood did reissues of Polish and Ukrainian, and there's been lots of Greek stuff, of course. There's lots of interest in Greece. I think in certain types of music, though, it just seems like a hopeless situation.
Well,
And,
I agree with you, but I just now the other day bought a digital download of the Excavated Shellac series
Yeah.
from Jonathan Ward's. I mean, that's like 106 tracks. It's on sale right now for $35. It's digital only, so there is no physical object. And, so maybe the audience is small for this thing of, a curated collection of things that you have access to. But if you are not investing hundreds of dollars to make a physical object and you only do it as a digital download, you make a couple of bucks. You're not putting out a huge amount of money. So maybe we should talk about that, because why not?
Yeah, but then the issue is I don't know who does the transcription and the equipment that it's stuff
Well, you
is
can
made
talk to
on.
Sherry.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I've bought reasonable stuff in the past. Maybe the style eye or need replacement, but there was a little business in England that was retipping style eye, and I did that, but of course that's been many years now.
So,
So I don't know, and I think like Dust to Digital is promoting, and you've probably gotten emails I've gotten for fundraising for some kind of a fund or that would bring people to different collectors and record things, which sounds okay, but in practice, how do you do that? I mean, it takes so much time. If you're trying to do 100 sides, that would take days. So I don't
Well,
know about that.
like let's live in a world of
Practicality.
let's live in a world of hope, and let's see if we can hook you up with Dust Digital's mobile recording studio and think about how that can be in the future. But uh, and like sometimes you need to do a little the Romanian community may not be super interested in these old Romanian recordings, but I'm pretty sure that Klezmerland might actually be quite interested in a lot of these recordings. And speaking of which, you graciously shared with me some tracks. But should we show the images first?
Sure, I don't, whatever you think is
Yeah,
interesting.
so Paul shared a really cool image, a couple of really cool images that I want to share with you. Can everybody see that? This is just a probably like a promo photo for a uh, photographer. But I think as Paul and I were thinking about early on, I mean, they didn't pull those kids off the street and give them instruments. Probably they probably had the instruments, you know.
It's a very cool symbol.
Yes, classic samba meek. Yeah, yeah, and then good hats, also high quality
Well,
hats. And then we have this one.
yeah, this was,
So tell us about this one, Paul.
well, this is Tanasa Kotelban, and they were quite a prominent group in Russia, and then in France. They toured the vaudeville in 1921, but they one of them eventually stayed in the U.S., but most went to France, Holland, and Germany. And I think that one of the young violinists right there is named Gregor Scherbahn, who was played in The Hague up until, I don't know, the 90s, and probably popularized the music in Holland. And so they recorded some, but the leader is on the far right. And I think I did have a recording of his, but that's okay. Whatever you,
Yeah, well, and is
whatever you
this
think would be more
also
interesting.
is this the band that also we have with the tuxedos on?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. There's a picture, I believe, an image in basically the same location, same personnel, same setup, but they're wearing black tie instead of the folklore costumes, which I thought was pretty interesting. So
Yeah. And the Vaseline,
was that?
and Vaseline on their hair.
Oh yes, well yes, absolutely. So you sent me a couple of recordings, and I want to share one of them in particular, because it really spoke to me uh, as an example of. So we're going to listen to this recording. This is the chanson du berger. No, it's the danse romaine from Iliescu. And this one reminds me of the Roma Lautar music that was collected by Speranța Radulescu in the 90s and in the 2000s. And so what strikes me as unusual about this particular track is that it seems very inside culture of like what we would call sort of inside Roma musica lautareasca culture, in a way that's quite different from the more sort of cafe concert, or like this more sort of romanticized Romanian music. I mean, so that was my first impression, and so I'd like to listen to it, and like I'd love to hear what everybody else hears in this track, and I'd love to hear what you hear in this track also, Paul.
Sure, sure.
Am I sharing the music?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Wow.
Yeah,
So-
that was, okay,
Yeah, go ahead. That was
was-
great.
most of their recording stuff was, what they recorded was Russian, gypsy romances, Tsarist era stuff. This is recorded in the 20s. So this is one or two things that was Romanian that they recorded. So the only thing I know about them, I guess they were in Berlin, and then they tried in 1924, played in New York, a vaudeville theater, and this Nikolai Mate, who stayed in New York, was with them. That's how he came. But this was recorded maybe a few years later in Europe.
Yeah. Anybody else have an impression of that? Anybody
Well,
who's familiar with
yeah.
Romanian stuff? Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
What do you call that? The fast part does that have a particular name?
It's a Serba.
That's a sirba.
The Serba,
Yeah.
yeah, but I mean, well, because it reminds me, not exactly the same, but it's similar in character to the fast part of Romania, isn't it?
Totally. Go ahead, Joel.
Oh yeah. Wait a minute. Let me lower my hand so it doesn't hang.
It's
in
okay,
the
I can lower your
air.
hand.
I got it. Interesting. Yeah, no, I mean, Paul sent me a tape actually years and years ago of Doina Ultului, all kinds of different versions. I don't even remember if this was on it, but it's interesting that
No.
this is the particular type of doina, because there are like dozens of different type of Romanian doinas. This is the type of doina that was then picked up on by the klezmer musicians. But what's interesting is that the klezmer musicians, with the exception of Dave Terrace, it's the only one I ever heard did this with rhythmic accompaniment, the improvisation with rhythmic accompaniment. And I know there's several different names for it. I think it's called a Lebedik doina or something like that. And Jeff, you might know some more. Michael Alpert knows a couple of these terms. So it was super interesting to hear.
I don't think I don't think that beginning part was a doina. I mean, I think that was actually a song. I mean, that's a song where there's no singer. That they were, and it's more like a taksim in some way. I
But
think.
Kintek Batrineshte probably is what they call it. But
Say what?
But
Kintek Batrineshte.
Yeah, yeah, I can just
Nice.
hear one of Speranza's, like a guy, one or two, either male or female people singing in that sort of high, musical
Right,
autoreasca
right.
sort
It's
of
a
voice, like,
falsetto.
Table song.
Donna Dumitru Dominica or something like that.
yeah,
Michael,
it's entirely that the two don't necessarily cancel each other out, because
Yeah,
I think
agreed.
a number of the doinas are songs, even the Jewish doinas.
Yes, yes.
And but the types of licks that the fiddle player is playing and the chord progressions, the the modal progression, it's the same. And so that accompaniment, the idea of doing this kind of improvisation over a steady pulse, is something
Sure.
that you find very typically in musica lautarasca and not in klezmer. But Dave Terrace was familiar with that, and
Well-
was still playing that way in the 1970s.
I've been told by people with much tradition in their background about that the free rhythm was the normal way, and then the fast rhythm accompaniment is the later development. For what that's worth, I mean.
But it would be interesting to know where Terrace picked that up on, because he came to the US in 1921. So when you say recent, are you talking about after that or before?
I don't have any idea. I mean, you can go
Yeah.
from recordings. I'm just going from what my friend Nikolai told me.
But you said this recording that we just listened to is from the 20s.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that would indicate to us that style of accompaniment for ballads must have been extant in the early part of the 20th century, no?
Yeah. Well, there's the maybe different regions. I mean, the Kintek Batrineshte with the singing usually has a very fast accompaniment, like that. And that's what it sounds like to me. Now, whereas the Doina Oltului is
More like a
drawn
doina
out.
doina.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's
Adrian?
other regional doinas. They're still very common in Banat, and that's long and free rhythm.
But I think there's a difference here between urban music and more sort of villagey and folkloric music as well.
Well, I don't think it's that strong really, because the people from the villages come to the cities too. So
No,
and
but
they
but
live
I
on the
mean,
outskirts of Bucharest. I mean, so
no, I mean outskirts of Bucharest is still Bucharest, right? I mean,
yeah, but it's outskirts.
right, but it's not like
Klezmer
Vrancea.
is outskirts, for example.
Well,
Basically.
but it's not up in the Carpathians, it's not Curly Baba, it's not
Right.
Vrancea, it's not, I mean, urban as in like urbanized.
Yeah.
And like, musicians from Klezmer in the south are playing let's not talk about Klezmer, but they're Lautar musicians who are playing for an urban audience, a public audience that's different from sort of a village audience or an internal community
Right.
audience. So that's what I'm talking about. Adrian, what were you gonna ask?
I wanted to mention that probably about 10 to 15 years ago, when Matt Temkin was working at YIVO, or being a fellow there, he emailed me this tune that was on a Jewish record, said Jewish Romanian music, and it
Can't really hear you, Adrian.
Adrian,
Turn original sound on.
turn
and
original
off
sound
echo,
on, exactly, yeah.
And turn off echo in the advanced section.
I'll try enable and see if that helps. It was done on a piccolo, and I played it with Pete many times, and it's got the same accompaniment in the orchestra. What I forget the exact title. I'll now look it up. I haven't played it in a long time, but it sure is very much the same as the structure of this, and keeping on this the same chord and the same pattern.
Right. I mean, this is a very common, we should not mistake that this is an extremely common musical form in Romania,
I
and
think
particularly after the Second World War, and particularly after folklore music is statified and codified within the communist system. Aspects of musica lautarească was sort of incorporated into the state model of music, and so those accompaniment forms become very, very common through all kinds of different kinds of folkloric music becomes like lautarized in some ways, I think. So I think this is a really awesome discussion, but I want us to keep moving. I want to keep moving forward. So I think Doina Chaser, I like that too. That's very cool. But the thing that strikes me, and we'll just move on from here with this, is that I do think that there's a sort of a wilder, having become sort of familiar with the sort of statified Romanian traditional music, like there's something a little bit wilder about this than I'm used to hearing, and particularly if it wasn't recorded in Bucharest. Is that right, Paul? This was recorded elsewhere?
Probably Berlin.
Yeah, that's really interesting to me.
But they had been in Russia for many years. So
Yeah, so they have, who knows what they were, who knows where they, so they must have brought that music with them, from an earlier performance style. So I'd love to have a discussion about this topic someday. maybe we can convene that conversation. But I'd like to hand over. Let's keep moving, and let's first say thank you to Paul for sharing that awesome track. And there's 2 more tracks that we haven't listened to that I'll put into our Dropbox that are of similar ilk that Paul shared for us to follow up with. And those images are incredible. And Sherry, what you got?
Well, I want to first start out by saying how very gratifying it's been to see over the last few months people really using the collection. That really makes my heart happy, because that was really the point of getting it all out there. And when somebody puts a link to one of the tunes in my collection in a Facebook post, it just sends me over the moon. So I'm really happy, and I hope as more of the things become available, people will use it more and more. Anyway, I just wanted to spend a few minutes talking about how to use these recordings beyond the obvious. I mean, I think that the 2 areas that most people use the old recordings for in the klezmer world are, first, of course, repertoire, and secondly, style. I mean, these were the things from which a lot of us learned what the ornaments were, where to put them, how to make them, and so forth and so on. But there's so much more that is there to be mined, obviously by non-klezmer, the non-instrumental area, but even by those of us working primarily with the instrumental music. For example, I was just paging through Spotswood this morning on another adventure altogether, and found a listing that in a vocal accompaniment, a vocal recording. I can't remember what it was right now because I didn't sort of pay that much attention to it, but it occurred to me that this was just the kind of thing I'm talking about. One of the musicians in the band backing up this vocalist was Mishka Siganov. And how cool is that? And I know there's obviously a lot of recordings that have Dave Terrace in the pit for Yiddish theater songs, and other people as well. And I think insofar as we know that information, it's just so interesting to have access to their non-dance performance that can also inform style, repertoire, and so forth and so on. Another thing, especially with regard to Yiddish theater recordings, is, first of all, if anybody were interested in exploring arranging for the Yiddish theater, we've got Rumshinsky, we've got Olshanetsky, we've got Elstein, all with recordings, and other lesser lights as well, who have produced recordings of theater music. And isn't that interesting? And specifically, one that fascinates me, and I'm actually in the process of writing an essay about this for our website, is Rumshinsky recorded a 2-disc, 4-part medley from Dem Rebens Niggen, which was one of his very popular operettas. And it's fascinating to me because when I went back and looked at it, I have 5 recordings of tunes, vocal tunes from that operetta, because we know that sometimes it's actually on the label of the records, it'll say what it's from. And so I went and I listened to all of those, and then I listened to the 4 parts of the the instrumental thing, and saw how it was woven together. And it was really interesting, because it wasn't just like, all right, I'm going to play tune A and then tune B and then a little bit of tune C and a little bit of tune D and so forth. All 5 of them were in there, but they were woven in really interesting ways. And I think it's a little window on a sort of a musical intelligence that I think I find fascinating. And I think there are other examples of that other people might also find interesting.
So would you say that, Olshanetsky made an arrangement for the recordings?
Rumshinsky, yes.
Rumshinsky made an arrangement for the recordings. Yeah. It's like in the days before you could do the Broadway cast recording or the Broadway cast album, this 4-part, is there some universe in which this is sort of a comparable thing, where over these 4 discs you can get a flavor of this?
It's hard to, I wouldn't think that you would get as much of a flavor from just the instrumental music as you would if you actually put together the music, the songs.
Right, but they didn't have the ability maybe at that moment or the funds to put together that whole thing. So this was like this reduction.
Yeah,
is
I
the
mean, it was
stand-in.
interesting. This is one of the few times that they did something as extended as that. I mean, you know, you're talking about 3-minute chunks of music, but somebody decided that it was worth 2 discs, 2 whole discs to put it together, and that's on the rare side of things. But that brings up the other point of which is that we have the ability now to start putting the songs together with the operetta. And perhaps, Michael, you could post that link again in the chat for the people who came later. Before this started, we were talking about that, and Michael actually found a YouTube recording where somebody had put together all the extant recordings from Bar Kochba, Goldfaden's operetta, in more or less in order of the script, which is pretty amazing. And that's the kind of thing that can be done. I remember when we published the CD set, Cantus, Klezmer, and Crooners, to highlight treasures from the collection, somebody who heard it was just blown away, because there was an aria from Schlamus that they never knew existed on record, and that kind of thing. So it provides another opportunity to add dimensionality to what we know about Yiddish theater. Another thing is the whole, I mean, beyond just repertoire itself, like let's learn a tune, the idea of variants, and like the tune that we played at the beginning of the session, that Belf version of what we mostly know as Zilber Nachasana. I mean, how cool is that? I mean, I'd always thought of that as a quintessentially American klezmer tune, because I've heard it in the 2 versions from American klezmer bands. And then you say, well, no, it came from Europe, here it is. And isn't that interesting? And that, you know, some of the other Abe Schwartz tunes, like the Yiddish and Shoma and stuff like that, you hear on Belf recordings, and it's like a whole different universe, because it kind of blows the lid off of what we've expected from these things, what we've come to think about them. So there's that. And you know, I think that hearing the difference in how the different groups harmonize things, how the different rhythms that they use to accompaniment, is all very informative beyond just the tunes themselves, or the general stylistic sort of traits that you can hear. So there's all of that can be done. And, you know, I mean, this is just what's coming to the top of my head. There's obviously many other things that could be looked at, but I mean, these recordings are such a huge treasure that
for the sake of the recording, I'm going to say that Joel has put in the chat that YIVO has a pretty large collection of Yiddish theater manuscripts, and that there may be, though they don't have a music archivist, it may be possible that Lauren and Eleanor might know their way around that collection, but it's a great resource waiting to be tapped. And Dan Karkner writes that all of this, not to mention many of the published books of those old operettas, were just the lyrics as text, no notation whatsoever. And so the recordings, as you mentioned, Sherry, can help put together, put sound, literally put sound to those words. For myself, I mean, it's my mind is sort of being constantly blown now. Like, we have this thing in the Kisselhoff collection where we've discovered that part 4 of this melody that we play as a Turkischer, we've taken to playing as a Turkischer, is from an 1834 French opera called La Juive. And so this is a little bit different from the Yiddish theater or Yiddish operetta, but the fact that these forms are moving backwards and forwards and are very much part of a working klezmer's musical lexicon, and are also for the reason that the public that was listening to this music found it appealing, or was informed about this music as well, is kind of expanding my horizons of what a working klezmer would know, should know, and probably the working klezmorim. We know this in New York. We're also very deeply involved in the theater.
Yeah,
you know.
Jeff just pointed out that the Zilber Nachasana tune was used as the melody for an Aaron Lebdev song. That's another thing that I think there are a lot of versions, and I actually have been in discussion with Jonathan Mallon about this because of his interest in language, that there are an awful lot of pairs of songs and instrumental versions that are very informative about things like phrasing and the sort of idiomatic syntax of the music itself and how that relates to the language, which is that's a topic that fascinates me. But without having this broad universe of recordings available, we'd never have access to those kinds of comparisons.
Right. Jeff, I see you raising your hand. What you got?
I just want to say that also talking about Goldfaden, at one time those tunes were so familiar, they were used by others also as bass for songs. Like I've heard some of them, which I didn't know they were from Goldfaden, on Jente and Mendel Telebende recordings where they put other words, and they do them quite well actually, in their own way. I don't, because most of those tunes originally had a folk origin anyway. They weren't written by Goldfaden. He stole them from various places.
Right. Well, and what better way to find a melodic material than to take things that people already know and that are familiar and now set them to words and, put them in a story. What were you going to say, Sherry?
They're not familiar to us anymore. These were so.
Yeah, we don't. Yeah.
They were, they got. I guess they got overplayed by about 1925, and right.
Yeah, well, there's such a big story that we know so little about. But like Eliakim Zunzer, who was at the turn of the century probably the most popular Yiddish folk song composer, as it were, Badchen, folk singer, etc. Apparently in 1905, they gave him an honorary concert in, I think, Carnegie Hall or someplace like that, led by Borodkin, was one of the klezmer musicians from Vilna that had worked with him and was later in one of the New York symphonies. And the audience, they knew all the songs and all the words and sang along through the whole concert. This is something we can't even conceive of nowadays.
Right. Right. Okay, I think, yeah, go ahead, Sherry.
The other thing that I wanted to bring up was that because my collection has been curated in such a way that I've gone all the way out from the classic performances, you can often trace things like one of the things that I'm particularly interested in is when you have these non-Jewish recordings, like, I don't know, some of the Cohen things and whatnot, is like what shticklich of actual Yiddish tunes do they choose and why? What has become emblematic? Like the tune Chassan Kala Mazel Tov that we all know, that's there a lot, but it's not the only one. And these were obviously meant as identifiers, and I think that there's a lot of information there that could be very interesting, not just to musicians, but to, sociologists or some, I don't know who the right-ist would be, but somebody, watching.
Right, so one of the ists.
Yeah.
One of the ists. Yeah, so Clara has very helpfully reminded me that we should keep moving along, and that's not to cut you off, Sherry. But let's hear from Michael, who also wanted to talk about a similar sort of issue. And I had posed the question, now that, particularly with Michael's work, in specific, that he's sort of coming to the tail end of this process of creating this discography, this massive discography of European early recorded Jewish music. So what's next? Aren't we done? Are we done? Are we done yet? What do we do now? And Michael said, no, I have many things to do. And so I think you're going to tell us a little bit about some of those things, and I'm going to share something. But why don't you go ahead, and I'm going to keep Clara in mind, and we're going to let this go for about no more than 10 minutes. Okay, Mike?
Oh yeah, I'll keep it short. Don't you worry.
Great. All right.
We are not yet finished, but I am. There's every reason to think that there's still a lot of material to be discovered. There are very good reasons that you can kind of put forward for that. But personally, I'll be backing off from frontline discography, as it were.
Frontline, I like that. Is that a thing?
I'll be making arrangements how it will be carried on. Incidentally, that link that you refer to is at the top of the chat list still.
I re-upped it and I put it somewhere else. And something that you wouldn't know, Michael, is that people who join the chat, don't join the meeting after something is put in the chat can't see the things that were in the chat from before.
Oh, no.
So
Okay,
anyway,
well,
I re-upped it for you.
What I'm going to swiftly talk about is, again, it leads off from a remark of Sherry's the other day when asked about possible uses or work that needs to be done with gramophone records. And she says, associate songs with their source works. And that rang an immediate bell with me, because the most difficult part of preparing the booklets for the two CDs actually, because I'm talking about vocal works here, of which had vocal recordings on them. The hardest part of writing the track commentaries was actually finding out where these songs came from, what their original context was. And in most cases, we just, by looking at the label, we just don't know. And it turned out to be really not easy at all, incredibly time consuming, even finding facts as straightforward and simple as the name of the composer, name of the lyricist, let alone which Yiddish play it came from, if it did indeed come from a play, because some of these songs, maybe just straight songs, weren't incorporated in any of these shunt productions, and they were standalone to be sung just by a singer on the stage. But there certainly is a huge need to put together some kind of ography.
Anography?
I feel another.
An operettography?
Oh, no, I'm not going to do another one. 25. I haven't got another 25 years.
Okay, well, let me throw this up on the screen. So,
I'd like to say what I did do, I ended up doing, just in order to keep track of what I was doing, I did inadvertently, as it were, put together a specimen document which could be used for precisely the kind of thing that Sherry had in mind. Now you've got the file for that.
yeah, I've thrown it up here on the screen. Can everybody see that? So this is another one of Michael's amazing documents. This is, we've got some headline information, we've got some source information, and then here we go. Michael, do you want to tell us what we're looking at?
Yeah, I'll have to blank you all out so I can see the full screen.
Oops.
Yeah, it's again, it's a more or less explanatory kind of table, and with, hold it, how can I? No, I can't manipulate this.
No, you can't. You got to tell me what to do.
Okay, I'm doing it. I'm just trying to scroll down. That's all. So if you look at, oh, Gordon Bennett won't stop still. Very basic information which is difficult to come by, but if it's arranged in this format, which is not necessarily the format that I would actually kind of use at the end of the day, it's just something I threw up in a hurry in order to just capture the information. So the title of the song, that at least will be on the record label. The author, that will take some time to find. Composer, blank. Lyricist, blank. Date, blank. Genre, blank. Ideally, what will be hopefully fitting in this column, source of information publisher, will be the online, the URL of a scanned copy of that particular play, of which there are many now on the internet,
Right.
coming from a variety of sources. The Polish digitized library collections are a very kind of rich source of scanned Yiddish plays.
So digital humanities is basically the fact that everything is being digitized and everything is being put online is really going to facilitate this work that might have been, for all intents and purposes, impossible even 5 years ago. Is that right?
Oh yes, very much so. And as more and more coming on day by day, actually.
Any chance you could share that with us, Michael? This would be really great to have. Is it? Can you
This
share it?
document. Yeah, well, you're welcome to it. Yeah.
Well, how do we get it?
You know, send me an email and I'll send you a copy.
Great, thanks.
But anyway, it's not cast in stone or anything. It's just something that was thrown up in a great hurry. I probably would do it completely different if I sat down and thought it through. And I'm sure, for example, there are lots of extra categories that need to go in there that I haven't got in there at the moment. But I was just testing the water, really, to see how easy it was and what problems there would be. But there's a lot of information, and what I haven't incorporated, and what I did do was I have masses and masses of photocopied pages of song texts, and also, as someone mentioned, they did produce in those days these quite voluminous, sometimes volumes of the lyrics to the latest Yiddish theatre songs. So there are very many of those. The record companies themselves used. How do I? Sorry. I just want to show people a book I've got in my hand here. So how do you turn the?
I think probably, I mean, if you've got it in your hand,
yeah,
physical object, then hold it up to the screen.
Oh, can you see something then? Yeah?
Let me unshare. Let me stop sharing. And we can all get back. Why don't we we're making you big again. And so now if you hold up that book.
Yeah, this is another good source for these things. The record companies, particularly the gramophone companies, Zonophone and Pate, used to produce these libretto.
You gotta hold it up, same level as your head. There you go. Even higher.
Libretto. Yeah. Here's a Russian one.
Yeah.
They used to put these out about every 6 months or so, and they would contain the lyrics to all the latest releases.
Oh.
Wow.
Yeah. They're very, very interesting. I've yet to come across one which actually has the text for any Yiddish songs, but what they do have are these ones. They solve a bit of a problem. One of the genres recorded in Imperial Russia were hundreds upon hundreds of Jewish, in inverted commas, humorous sketches. And these contain all of those. I mean, not this volume, but all these wasn't put together. They did make the texts available. So.
And Mike, what language?
It's just quite interesting actually, because you come to read these, and if you like racial stereotyping, then you're in seventh heaven. But the truth is, the strange truth is that almost without exception, the people, these coupletisti as they called them, who recorded and sang and recorded these humorous sketches, were Jewish actors, Russian-speaking Jewish actors. I wouldn't say they're anti-Semitic anyway, but it's just very much of their time.
And they're singing in Yiddish?
No, they'll probably they will speak Russian with a Yiddish accent. You can kind of get that quite often, and you will get the odd Yiddish expression fed into the dialogue. No, it's basically Russian, Russian language.
Right.
There are many such sketches as well in the Hungarian. Again, hundreds and hundreds of Hungarian Jewish sketches.
You have any Romanian ones? I'm very curious about the Romanian ones.
I think there are. This is something that I believe I've missed. So I need to go back over all my Romanian catalogues.
Because I know that they're...
yes, there definitely was a Romanian equivalent. And I haven't even begun to document these yet, particularly in the interwar years in Poland. It was, again, they were called schmonzes, and they were really popular with Jews and Poles. And some of the leading Jewish artists of the day were also great schmonzes artists and very, very famous for it. So Yeah, so it just emphasizes that there is still a hell of a lot of work to be done. A hell of a lot.
Right. John
But-
Dimitrik has we have a bunch of coupletis in Romanian coupletis in his 78 collection. We were dying to find out more information about these artists or more of the lyrics or any of that stuff. So I'm just, if you ever happen to come across more Romanian stuff, like hit me up, because
Yeah, well, I will be doing that in come the new year, and once we got a few other things sorted out.
okay, so Michael, Joel, and there's been some things happening in the chat here. Michael Alpert suggests that maybe you should be connected with the Digital Yiddish Theater Project out of University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee. Do you know about that group?
I don't know.
Okay, well,
Oh
we'll
yes,
do
I'll be
that.
happy to. Yeah.
There, maybe we can offline about that, because I think that I've heard of that, and some of our mutual friends are involved in that project. So it'd be
Yeah,
a
they're
great
great.
opportunity to collaborate and share information. I'm sure they would be delighted to meet you and your spreadsheets and your tables.
But there is one further problem, of course. So we've been talking so far about recordings for which we have texts.
Mhm.
The real problem is where we've got recordings and we don't have texts, and it
Yeah.
all has to be figured out. That is really difficult, because there are not many people around with that particular skill. And I think the only way that problem for these kind of recordings is if some kind of very informal team were put together and just treat it as a higher form of crossword while away your spare hours.
Yeah, one of those very, very
There's
difficult.
no deadlines
cryptic-
or anything, but what you need is a group of people looking at the same song, because everyone has a very different pair of ears, and they will hear things that perhaps someone else doesn't hear.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Well, maybe some of our mutual friends will be you and the Yiddish Theater Working Group will be the kernel of that group. I see that Joel and Bob Blacksburg and Michael and Mishka have their hands raised. So let's go Joel first, then Bob, then Michael.
Yeah, this is just a quick comment. This is for Paul and Mike. I don't know if you're in touch with Axel Wegen in Dusseldorf. He's a musician and a 78 collector, and his wife is Romanian. He's got a pretty big collection of old Romanian recordings. So he knows a lot about music. So he's a really great person for Jeff also, or anybody who's interested, to be in touch with. He's helped me figure a lot of stuff out over the years. Here, I'll
Cool.
put his
Maybe you
name in
can
the.
share the contact. That would be great. Okay, Bob, what you
I
got?
think he's on Facebook. Also.
Okay.
I
if you
just,
want
yeah. I just want to encourage anybody who's trying to organize this kind of data to develop some skill in some kind of database structure. I mean, Sherry's site has, I'm just looking at it, have a series of fields that are a good start. And Sherry, maybe you can talk a little bit about what kind of effort it takes to work into that kind of structure. But every time I see somebody collect structured data in a word table, I'm thinking so much effort is going into something that can't be reorganized and reused. And computers just make that a lot easier to do. I really think encourage people to learn enough skill so that you have something that has more structure.
So
Yeah, I made a FileMaker database, and the university obviously has their own cataloging thing, and I gave them my information, but they have to go and confirm everything on their own. But anybody who's interested in seeing it, I can send a blank. I could give you a copy of the database, but I could also send you blanks. But I have a field in there for source work and composers and lyricists and all that kind of stuff. So insofar as I have access to the information, I try and include it just for my own information.
Before we go back to Michael, I'm going to say that this conversation has inspired a component of the Klezmer Archive project, which is to account for, I've just learned that we have to account for these connections with opera, operetta, libretto, and all of these things in our data structure for the Klezmer archive for that to be useful. And for what it's worth, it is a little bit time consuming, but I know that we've already worked on and talked about Michael's tables for his discography and how we can eventually account for all of that information in our data structure. And once we figure out how to take those tables and put them into the metadata structure for Klezmer archive, then this kind of operetta database can be the same thing. I mean, Word documents are not the ideal format, but if that's the format that Michael's working in, like, I figure the work is, getting the work done is half of the battle, and then datafying the results of it is almost its own project.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
I would just like to emphasize that I'm well aware of the limitations of table format now. The truth is, I never set out to write a discography. It was just a little hobby that I was doing for myself, and I knew how to use the table. It just grew, and one day I realized I had this vast amount of information in table format. And at that stage, I began to be aware of its limitations, and more recently, the problems that occur when you're trying to transit from a table format into some other format. So certainly, as regards this latest kind of table of plays and authors and lyricists and so on, it definitely won't be in table format. So you can set your hearts.
We'll move you into a Google Excel sheet as like the next level.
Oh God, Excel, please. But, actually, while I'm here, can I make an announcement?
Absolutely.
Which is very, very good news. I think Joel already knows this, but the EMI archive, which has been shut since spring last year because of you know what, Universal Music, I think it's Universal Music, has declared that it's going to build the archive a brand new custom built premises, which will be much easier to access for both staff and researchers. So I don't know how long it's not going to happen overnight, probably 2 years, perhaps 3 years. But when it does open its doors, it will be radical, because at the moment the archive is in tiny premises. They're virtually unused. They're certainly unused. Researchers are welcome, but you're not going to be able to do anything once you arrive there, because everything is pretty much inaccessible because of the lack of space. But once it's back to a proper archive footing, like the old archive, then it'll be a very, very different story, and I'll be able to finish off a lot of jobs which are still outstanding there, which includes finding copies.
Yay!
Yes, I know. Never did get to the very end of that particular task.
All right, well, that's great news, Michael. Thanks for sharing. We're a little over time now, and it's not your fault, Michael. It's because we've all been chattering about all kinds of interesting things. I'm going to turn it to Mish, and then we're going to go back into gallery view and sort of open up for more general discussion, and at least give Jeffrey. I have a question for Jeffrey, so we're going to go from there. So go ahead, Mish.
Hi, just briefly, I think I'm not sure that the Digital Yiddish Theater Project sees this kind of amassing of materials and kind of becoming a central database as within their purview, as some of us have noted in the chat here. But I'd be happy to talk with, we could talk private, offline about approaching them, and Joel Berkowitz, and who's very open and great. It may be that they're more about scholarship about Yiddish theater than all this, but we could continue that.
Great. I mean, it's nice to know that there are multiple projects that are talking very seriously, approaching this topic of Yiddish theater, and in fact, to continue the archival research and these sort of studies. That the work that Michael's doing is at some point going to be essential. I mean, knowing what you're working with expanding the horizon of what we know, always helpful. Okay, so I'm personally going to go into gallery view, or let's get, Clara, if we could get Jeffrey in here. Let's get Jeffrey in here on the spotlight. And there you are. I wanted to ask you, Jeffrey, you had graciously said that you would go ahead, that you would pass on your sort of speaking time, but notwithstanding, do you have anything you'd like to kind of add before I ask you a couple of questions?
I did a little while ago. I'm not sure what it was though now. So it's covered a lot of ground.
No.
Yeah. No, nothing in particular. It's okay.
Jeffrey had written a really wonderful sort of set of like long form questions that you sent to me like quite early on in the discussions about this project, and all of us, the 5 of us who have been discussants and hosts here, have looked at all these questions, and you wrote about audio recordings as historical sources and the idea that these resources take us beyond the realm of individual oral history or human memory, but the second main topic was this idea of the influence of recordings on our ideas of klezmer music. Yeah. And this is a question that I've been grappling with personally myself, is in encountering the Kisselhoff and Makieniewicz materials and what they show us about the sort of vastness of repertoire. And so I added to this discussion this set of questions. Well, you had mentioned a program from 1930s of nifty Naftuli Brandwein that contains a lot of popular American sort of standards alongside of the klezmer.
It wasn't even alongside. Well, the klezmer wasn't even on the program.
The klezmer wasn't even on the program.
No, they probably played some, but the program was entirely, popular music. Maybe not even that popular. It's a lot of the stuff I never heard of, but they were, like foxtrots and waltzes. And
is this a radio show? What are you when you say?
No,
Joel asked what?
It was some kind of a. One of the things they did, not only weddings, but they played for societies. Mm-hmm. Like every Landsmannschaft had at least one annual thing. Sometimes right. A lot more than one. And so it was one. I'm sorry I don't have it right in front of me.
Is this like a written thing or a
printed program? I found it at YIVO, and they have an archive of the societies, and I just happened to find that. But it was Nifty Brandwein's radio orchestra, I think he called it. But it's not a big deal, except that. Just that even Naftuli Brandwein, who we think of as like the quintessentially, Yiddish Jewish klezmer who didn't even read music, was leading a band, and they were playing this stuff. How well they were playing it, or who knows? But it must have been well enough, because they were getting business.
They had a printed program. They must have been.
I mean, this was already the program of an event that actually took place.
Right.
And right. Of course they played in the mountains, so if they were playing stuff like that, everybody was playing.
Right. I see you, Joel, and I see you, Joel, and I'm gonna get you in just a second. I'm just gonna add to this idea that we're so accustomed to, like working with sources like, we look at Beregowski, who selected out of the Kisselhoff material the most Jewish, right. The most, the representative of what he is identifying as a Jewish style. And he's doing this for all kinds of reasons, and that we can talk about, and that we know about. Some, and so when we read Beregowski, we see a very specific set of repertoire that has been selected for us, and we're thankful for it. Don't get me wrong. But now when we look at the larger collection of the entirety of the Kisselhoff collection, we see an enormous variety of music that was being performed and that was being preserved in a notated form by these folks. Klezmer musicians, other kinds of musicians. It's a little bit hard to say, but we can assume and we can say that many of these were what we would define as klezmorim. And so our vision of what is the repertoire of music of the klezmorim, as opposed to klezmer music, that for me is something that I'm really thinking about right now.
Well, I'd like to make a comment about that. I think some of that music, okay, it's all sociologically interesting. It's maybe, even ethnomusicologically in a certain way. I personally, to hear, I don't have any burning need to hear Nifty Brownwine playing, How High the Moon or something like that.
On Starter's Ball.
Yeah, exactly. Although it might be interesting in its own way. But I think there's some things that are closer into the Jewish repertoire that have also gotten lost.
Such as?
Like, let's say quadrilles, waltzes, which may be of a more Jewish, some of them anyway, of a more Jewish character that we just are not familiar with. And then there's like one group, what's him, Hochman, recorded a few things of a kind that nobody else, I don't know, not familiar with it. Like he recorded the Oginsky Polonaise. Yeah. Now that was something that was played traditionally before the mitzvah dance, section. I don't think they played it for everybody, but it was like an introduction to the mitzvah dance. It's not part of it, and they didn't dance to it. But he's playing it, and it's very interesting. It's played how they play it. It's played at a much slower tempo than I would have thought. And they play through the whole thing.
What's the name of that piece again, please?
Sure. It's a Polonaise by Oginsky.
Oginsky.
Oginsky. And that particular Polonaise was supposedly used.
Oh, Bergovsky even mentions it.
Huh? Bergovsky mentions
it specifically.
It's called Pożegnanie Ojczyzny in Polish, which means farewell to the homeland. And Adrian we created a recording around it. It's known as Oginsky's Polonaise. It is, I think, it may even be the first tune in German Goldenstein's large notebook of 500.
Very interesting. Okay, I still see you, Joel. I've got you right there. Kisselhoff material, lots of polkas, lots of mazurkas, lots of polonaise, and we're just now, we're kind of barely scratching the surface of like looking at them as a collective whole, and sort of looking at them through the lens of, well, these were selected. They were selected to be written down and preserved in some way by some person, so that's what we know right now. And now why, what, how they fit in, we don't know those things yet, but hopefully we'll learn more about that by examining that part of the corpus, I think, in toto. So, go ahead, please.
Something else which you might get from Kisselhoff too, is the difference between the Northern repertoire. And
we have it for sure. It's there.
Yeah.
I mean, already on it for sure.
Yeah. And
yeah. Well, and because we have this is one of the first notebooks that got a lot of attention, is this Motorräder's notebook. Mm-hmm. And Motorräder's notebook is filled with things that never made it into Bergovsky, because they're Bulgars, there's Horas, there's Zhoks, there's like all of this Bessarabian, like it's really very clearly like Bessarabian Moldavian material that has like, just tornadoed itself. It's like trained itself north to Dubno, where Rader is from, and so he's written it all down. Presumably, this is my guess. This is not scientific, but my guess is like he wanted to write down repertoire that was new and that he needed to remember, rather than the stuff that he'd been playing for his whole life. He wouldn't write that down. Why would he write it down? He knew it, right? So I think we're already seeing evidence of that for sure. You know?
Yeah, but I mean, that is Southern repertoire. That's going north. But what they liked, I think they liked a lot of stuff that was um, we would think of as Polish, although
Mhm.
they also played a lot of Polish stuff in Galicia.
Yeah.
It's part of
Yeah.
Poland.
All right.
And but also, um, what was the other thing? Yeah, I mean, it's good to bear in mind that the vast majority of klezmer recordings were made by Southern musicians. The great majority. Um, I mean, there are definitely, Joel and I have talked about this. There are definitely some northern, like the musicers, but who
Mhm.
married into one of them married into Dave Tarras' family, uh, but most of them, the great majority are from Ukraine and Poland
South.
and Romania.
Yeah.
Well,
Joel,
bear that in mind.
you've been, yeah, it is worth bearing in mind. I mean, Zev talks a lot about that in his book, that most of the commercial recordings we have. So, um, yes, but more, we'll be reporting out on Kisselhoff materials, I hope, for years to come. Okay, what you got, Joel?
Oh dear, now we've gone.
So many
Oh, I was
things.
going to well, my original comment was related to the Brandwine, this concert program from Brandwine or whatever it was, society program, just about his groups. First of all, I mean they all played American music, right? So
Yeah.
he played by his colleagues who remembered it, they said, well, he didn't play saxophone very well. He learned American music by ear. He had funny titles for them because he couldn't pronounce the English, but he played them. He played, I Can't Give You Anything But Love, Baby, and all that kind of stuff. And the other thing is, of course, is that, right, these were generational bands. So he had his son playing saxophone. He had his two nephews playing piano, Nat Brandwine and Chester Brandwine playing piano. Um, and his nephew, Pesci, I think, also played saxophone. So, those guys obviously were probably more likely to cover the more American repertoire. That's the one thing. And the other thing is, and this is something that klezmer musicians have commented on a lot, and I think this is related to the question of these manuscripts and stuff, is that they didn't write down the Jewish stuff because they didn't need to, unless it was rarefied, like from Stempanu or something like that, as we're seeing in like the Makanovetsky. But the commonplace stuff, the Zilber Nechasan and stuff, they didn't need to write that stuff down because they played it all the time. But the Polish stuff and the more exotic stuff or the American stuff or whatever, they would be more likely to write down. So it's possible with this Brandwine thing that they only put in the program, that stuff, but that they played all kinds of
Yeah,
Bulgars and things that nobody bothered to write down.
well, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, because I can't imagine them hiring Brandwine and him not playing klezmer.
Right. And I think also that it's the same thing for the audience. The audience they wanted to see this program, but the ones who came for the Jewish music, they didn't need that. Yeah.
Is there, okay, I'm totally speculating, but is there any, I mean, is this a copying of sort of Western, or aristocratic social dance style, or American at this point social dance style, where you literally have a dance card, and you have to arrange your partner for the first waltz or the foxtrot or the whatever, and so for that reason you would need to have a printed program.
Well, it wasn't in the form of a dance card. It was just in the form of a list of, dances. But I think you're right in a way, because I think it's a sort of a formalized record that we really, this is what we did on our, 34th anniversary, and they just to, it is sort of more genteel to have something like that.
Paul Gifford, did you share
Oh,
an image like of a newspaper, like a drawing of like a big grand ball that had like on the wall, there was like a whole list of dances. In my memory, am I out of my mind thinking about that?
Yeah, I think you're thinking of a photo of a Romanian group from Nikolaev, which had a sign in the back, but not a dance card or something. I've never.
It didn't have a list of
I've
dances on
seen
it.
something like that I think it was from the 19th century in America.
Yeah,
Kind of a Purim ball. They all had Purim balls, including the very assimilated, and they would have the list of the dances, which were all the the standard society social dances of that time, the quadrilles and the lancers and so on. A long list, yeah. So it's something like that. By the way, I want to point out this program of music is part of the souvenir book, or part of the program of the event. It isn't just that. So it has the officers and the whatever, So that's what I meant by a kind of a formal record of the.
yeah. Joel points out that I think that this image that I've got in my brain is from Sonia's book. It's from Sonia Galantz's book, where she's talking about, there's an image of something from a newspaper or something like that has like, the reporting on the society ball of the Purim Spiel, where they have all the people and there's all the garlands and things, and then there's a big list of the dances. So yeah, I think that's where that image came
I
from.
think coming back to what you were saying before about the real repertoire of the klezmer, or the larger repertoire of the klezmer. It's interesting though that I think this is what Zev meant by transitional. Some of the Romanian dances really were considered klezmer or became considered klezmer, but the equivalent kind of dances like mazurkas and polkas did not. I don't know exactly why that is.
I think Zev's take on it, if I believe, is that what he considers to be the transitional repertoire was sort of adopted into Jewish aesthetic and transformed in some way, whereas like mazurkas sort of remained mazurkas. They didn't become there were not forms of them that sounded more Jewish. Joel, you can please disagree with me because I don't know that I've got this right, but I think that's a little bit of the boundary that Zev is talking about. Now I know Sherry had her hand up, and I see Joel's got his up again. Are you responding to this exact thing? Or?
Yes, partly.
Okay,
and then I had another comment from before that I meant to wedge in somewhere. This is, I'm sorry, what were we just talking about? There's so many things,
talking
so
about
many
transitional
threads.
repertoire and
The transitional repertoire.
and co-territorial.
In my analysis, and I think I've talked about this with Jeff a lot, is that it's partly geographic, but it's also chronological, that there at any given point in time, the klezmer musicians were playing music from various eras, right? In the early 20th century, they were still playing stuff from the 18th century, but they were playing newer stuff and newer stuff and newer stuff. And I think it's that the Romanian stuff was a more recent layer that was added. But by the time, like if you look in the U.S., like the doina was considered to be the quintessential part of the Jewish wedding. It was no longer viewed as this esoteric thing.
Right.
That was the one thing. The other thing is about this music having been forgotten, but I think we shouldn't forget that like these musicians like Taras Brandwein, Schlemke Beckerman, and many unnamed musicians are on dozens, maybe hundreds of recordings that were made in the US of Polish music, Ukrainian music, Russian music, etc., that we can now access, not just in archives, but also on YouTube. And sometimes you'll be listening to some Polish singer and all of a sudden you go like, oh my God, that's Schlemke Beckerman in the background. So these guys this is what they did. This was their working repertoire.
Yeah, for sure. Sherry, do you want to chime in here? I know you had your hand up there.
Yeah, a couple of points. Just briefly on the subject of printed programs, I was giving a session in Madison a few years ago on the South American component of my collection, and there were a couple of people researching South American Yiddish music who were blown away because one of the songs that I played was something that they had seen on a printed program and had no idea that a recording existed. So that, again, very exciting thing that you can use to sort of cross the media that you're working with. But I also, on the subject of this other repertoire, there is a phenomenon that there are many examples of in the collection of the potpourri. And most of the time, they're potpourris of either Russian or Polish or Ukrainian songs, either played by the Jewish musicians like Hoffman and you know, some of the other Jewish bands, Kendall and so forth, but also by the sort of Jewish adjacent musicians or the generic national orchestras, Russian orchestra or whatever. For example, Kirilov, who I sort of consider him the Jewish balalaika orchestra because he had so many Jewish releases. He has a medley of old time tunes that includes things like Turkey in the Straw, and you know, some of the things which we would consider, you know, traditional American music. So those potpourri are another very fruitful source of what was going on in terms of non-Jewish repertoire in the Jewish world.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, lots of Romanian military brass band potpourri also in this, I believe, in the spirit of producing this national style, that the Romanians took a great interest in creating a Romanian national music in this 1870s, 80s, 90s period as they were becoming a nation. And they wanted to get on the bandwagon of nation building. And so they did a lot of that through music. And so all of these military brass bands, all of the regimental bands have potpourri this, potpourri that, you know, putting together, smushing together things, you know, much of which we would consider to be Jewish music, right? With our ears today. So, yeah, cool. I want to hear more about the South American stuff, Sherry. This is you teased us a little bit with some of those recordings that we listened to in your session. So you're muted.
I don't think I actually played any of the South American stuff, but I've got quite a large corpus of that. And you know, from the Klezmer point of view, the most interesting is Sam Lieberman. You know, his stuff has been available on, there were a couple of LPs produced that were basically reissues of his 78s, but it's interesting because there's a lot of different repertoire there that I don't know if he wrote it or if it was just stuff that migrated to Argentina with him.
Where do we get these LPs and reproduce? I don't know if I've ever even.
Well, Yivo had them, so I had copies of them from Yivo. I now own the actual LPs, but obviously would rather work from the 78s. I think I have all of the 78s that went into the LPs in the collection. And it's really interesting stuff because there isn't a lot of overlap in terms of actual repertoire. And because while it's a more modern sound, because these were recorded probably after the war, you know, he plays personally in a fairly traditional way. And it's kind of interesting to hear. And then there's a lot of theater music. Because, you know, Argentina became the heyday of the Yiddish theater in New York was probably in the 20s, and by the 30s and 40s it had migrated to South America. So that was sort of where all the Yiddish theater stuff was happening down there. All the companies all toured down there, and
right.
You know, it's something that's very interesting because I think that well, just on a personal note, it's sort of always very amusing to me to see Yiddish titles transliterated into Spanish as opposed to into English, which makes for some, you know, or translated. So that's kind of fun. But you know, I think it could represent a sort of stylistic corpus that really wasn't influenced so much by America, because the people went directly from Europe to South America. I don't know. I mean, maybe they all, but by that point, the sort of American recording industry was ubiquitous and everybody knew what all that stuff sounded like, but maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah. Does anybody have anything else on that? Michael, I don't know if you have thoughts about that, but I'd like to listen before we get to, we're already at 3:30. So I was wondering, maybe we should listen to that other new Belf, because we saved the more, if possible, we saved the more exciting one for last. What you got, Jeff?
I just want to, Sherry, could you, before you play it, could you please tell us the exact titles?
Let me share the scans.
At least the two we're playing today, it basically says Ruminsky Tanitz.
But one of them is a Chaban. One of them is a Tanitz and
What
one
are
of
the
them is a
numbers then?
Chaban.
Do you know the catalog numbers?
Yeah, hold up.
Oh, wait. Wait,
Can you see that?
if I get my magnifying glass.
13072,
Yeah,
13074.
Okay, hang on just a second, okay?
Wait, I think I'm not
Okay,
sharing the right.
Ruminsky Tanitz and Ruminsky Chaban. Yeah?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so, right, so those were, I'm just looking, there was a released in March 1913. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah, so there's, oops. Oh my God.
So which one did we hear now?
So, well, I don't know because I couldn't quite figure out which one connected to which.
Oh, let me look it up. Hang on.
So there's the other one.
Yeah, Ruminsky Chaban. Now, I wonder if this is the same one as that was recorded on Amor that we played in my session. Not Sherry didn't play it, but it was one that.
Ooh, I wonder about that.
that was
Okay,
called
well,
Chaban.
shall we listen and find out?
Yeah, let's find out.
Michael Aylward, can you help us discographically, or do we want to wait for Sherry? You're clicking.
What do you want to know?
Well, we want to know if, do you know about this record? That I've got.
I can tell you in this. How do I call up?
Why don't we play it and then?
Okay, you guys do your discographical magic, and I shall. Let's play the record. I will drop things into the chat for both of you, or for everybody. Okay, let's get back to GIF 5. Oh, and I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to share music. Everybody's got their things going. And here we go. Sorry. I didn't want that tune to stop. That was so great. Joel, you have something to share about this stuff?
Oh no, I was just Michael made a comment about Karaguna, which is a northern a Greek dance from the north, I think Thessaly or something, and it follows a similar pattern, which is very familiar also to us from many tunes in the klezmer repertoire, like parts of the what's often known as Von der Hoppe, I guess, from the Harry Kendall version, and also parts of things like the Grüne Cousine, die Mama ist gegangen, and a whole host of other things. So it's just very archetypal of a particular type of tune.
Yeah, it's a whole thread that seems to run through, from the Jewish Southern repertoire down through into the Aromanian and Vlach, kind of northern Greece, Macedonia, southern Albania, tundas in there that, for those of you that heard Marty Schwartz's talk all about that. Yeah, it's a thing.
The last
Exactly what it is, we're not sure.
the last tune in that is exactly like something from that we've heard. I don't know from where, but
Yeah, that's the one. That's the one that's specifically Karaguna in the Greek repertoire, like Thessaly, Epirus, in Epirus, northern Greece.
But it's definitely in some klezmer pieces of, I don't know what.
Well, that happens to be the exact line of Zeit. Oh, not Zeitlustig.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I
Are
recognize.
we going to call that? Do we call this? I mean, if I gave a title to it, I'm going to have my band play this because made up of two bassoons. The hell.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
How could you go wrong?
So what do you? What can I call this?
Chaban.
Tell us what it's called.
Ruminsky Chaban.
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 What does chaban mean? Is that a coat, a cloak?
It means shepherd.
No,
Yeah.
that's choban. Okay, choban. All right.
Choban. Yeah,
Choban.
Choban.
Chapan.
Choban.
Cloak.
Choban.
Yeah. The thing that really struck me about these two sides is that the piano player was really vibed into the whole band, actually, in a way. Like, he was very excited about that first track that we listened to. He was very flourishy in a way that we don't often hear with him. Or if it's the same dude, I don't know, like maybe a different dude. We have so many conversations, but like the unlike our sort of like what many of us have come to the idea of the piano player being kind of out of sync and off time and whatever, like this was very cohesive to my ears.
Except that
Speaking of out of sync and out of time and all of that, like Sherry was saying, the beginning of the other side, what do we call that, Zilberne Chassen or whatever you want to call it. Somehow Kurt has a copy of this that he shared some months ago. So
it could be. It's on the
maybe he got it from you.
site. It's on the Madison
Oh, okay.
site.
So maybe he got it from there.
Yeah.
So, and I wrote back to him. My immediate reaction was, I can't believe they released that in the shape that it was in.
Well, they got together after the first few seconds, like they usually do. Usually, that kind of train wreck happens at the end, but it's kind of interesting to hear it happen at the beginning.
But also, they don't.
Hope, right?
This might just be my imagination, but I had the feeling they didn't speed up as much. So maybe that would be, we don't really know what the secret to Belf's speeding up is, but it's very organic. I experimented with it with my students, and it's extremely hard to replicate that kind of speeding up. So maybe it was the pianist who was doing that. The other one.
The other one.
Who knows?
You don't find that sort of gradually gaining pace is like a really natural thing to do, or is that just me?
No, it
No,
happens a
because
lot.
the tendency is the tendency is to do it sort of the Russian way, which is to get faster each time you go back to the A section. But this is getting
I hate
just
it.
slightly faster over each. It's very difficult to replicate.
Huh. Okay. Maybe I'm a standout in that saying. What were you going to say, Adrian?
The crunchiness, the messiness, whatever you want to, in the best way. I've always described in terms of Belf, because I don't think any other band has this component to it. I always thought that they started too soon. They didn't call off the tune. The needle's going, and some of the bones especially go, what are we playing? Oh, that tune.
That's what
And
it
it
sounds
just
like.
takes them a while to catch on to which tune it is.
Yeah,
I-
you come crashing into the tune. I mean, as an old time musician, this totally doesn't surprise me. Like, like if this idea of the recording industry is like, I don't know, like relatively new. I mean, people weren't, I don't know, like in old time music and probably and for me, klezmer music too. The first time through is just to help you remember the tune, and then you go from there, and then you by 10 minutes in, like you've got it figured out, and now you're doing fun stuff. So this idea you only got 3 minutes, you got to start on time together, like
When you're
But
actually
I do.
playing-
Go
when you're
ahead,
playing-
Jeffrey.
When you're playing at a wedding, you can do that because you're going to be playing for a long time.
Totally. I don't know.
Do we actually know if they had multiple takes in these Belf sessions? Because
Well-
I mean, maybe that's it, that there was only one take, and so they released what they had.
And in that column that I found, it gave the impression that they did but that was because he was talking first about like opera singers and so on. He said they will do it as many times as they have to. And then he goes to Belf. But I don't think that applies to Belf. I think they just did them one after the other. Just from the way they play it.
Did
I got. But I just wanted to also add that the first one today, it was the first time where I actually got the impression that they were doing that deliberately, like they were speeding up deliberately. I usually thought the impression I used to always get was that they don't really know what they're doing. They're just getting faster, But this time I really got that impression that they were doing it, in a very controlled way.
Do we want to listen again to a little bit of that, the other side, just to refresh our memories so that everybody can hear that crashing into the tune kind of quality? Let's hear a little bit more of that, just so we can get it back in our brains. Oh, wait. I'm not sharing. I am sharing. Sorry. can you please throw another compliment to Chris for his amazing and awesome and excellent transfers? Just
Sure.
pass on from the group or from me
I will.
in particular, because like you can really hear the bass of the piano.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, that Daniel Karkner had written in the chat that the first tune we heard at the start, we just now reheard, the pianist echoing the melody is also something we don't hear so much in Belf. Is that correct? And I think I would say, yeah. I mean, but it's so obvious. Dum ba 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 ba. You know, he does it right out the gate, so he must have known this tune.
Yeah.
Am I wrong?
No, I mean, the thing is, like, he must have known this tune, but you'd think he would have known all the tunes, you know. In other words, right?
Well,
As a
we don't
banjo
know that it's
player-
the same person each time either. I mean, that's the
No, we
trouble
don't know
with
that
not
either.
understanding, not knowing what was going on, actually.
You got somebody here that can play the piano.
Yeah. I just want to point out that this is one of the things that interested me about that particular tune is their lack of a cadence chord. And this is something that Belf did also in the Rebenstance. And I remember getting into a big argument with Henry Sapoznik about that. He was saying, well, it was a mistake. And I say, no, it was an aesthetic choice. I mean, particularly in Rebenstance, they do things with rhythm. They don't need to do stuff with harmony because the harmony didn't matter. And here they do it again. And I think that, again, it reflects an aesthetic choice, which I sort of like. But
I like this too. He does it. They do it on one of the chassidals, and I'm going to get the name wrong. I can't remember which one it is, but it's another one of the chassidals in the A part where we would ordinarily just instinctively do a cadence. They choose not to, and they save the big move for the going into the B part, and then you modulate as you go to the B part. And I think it actually adds a lot aesthetically to the whole effect, because then you're making the big deal about the when you're making the movement. So
yeah, I think it tells us a lot about what harmony was used for. And, that's, I think that the more Belf recordings we have, the more we deepen our understanding of that aspect of things. And that's one of the things I value a lot.
go ahead,
Also,
Jeffrey, then Adrian.
If I'm not mistaken, this is short. I think that on Zilbene Chassan, he does the same thing, though, doesn't he? And that may be one of these rare examples where, he might have known this recording, if I'm right about that. But I think he did.
He who?
Schwartz, wasn't it?
Well, there's two of them. I think a Schwartz and an Ellenkrieg or something, a Schwartz and somebody else.
Okay,
I don't remember.
homework,
I'd have to go look
everybody.
again. Yeah.
Homework for
One of them
everybody.
will be-
Check out the cadences in Zilberne Chasana, all known recordings.
it was one of the first tunes I learned, and I always cadence this way. But what's different to me is the added time.
Oh, you mean that when he goes, instead of going
an
dum,
extra beat.
dum, dum, and
Yeah,
it-
it's an-
he goes dum,
Dum,
instead of dum, dum.
dum.
Yeah,
That's an extra beat.
but there's also that other thing, instead of going bum, 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 he goes dum, dum, right? That's interesting.
Yeah.
But this is such a typical thing for, people who are working from oral tradition to add beats or add bars and stuff. I mean, I
Totally.
think that thing where they do the dum, da dum, 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 that's deliberate. But the
That's
stuff about
every-
like adding a beat at the end of a section and stuff, I remember, and since Dan mentioned these Canadian, Ukrainian musicians, I once jammed with some of those guys up in the Pacific Northwest. And man, they had this old, I can't remember if he played fiddle or timbali. That guy was, every repeat had a different number of beats to it. It's like you had to just chase him all over the knot page.
Eight measures. Eight measures as a standard per section is like, well, why A, overrated, and B, like I think it's
Boring.
It's overrated, and it's new. It's not trad, as you would say. I mean, yeah.
This
Yeah,
is
I mean-
not even something that's like Eastern European or anything. I mean, if you listen to like Robert Johnson's blues
Totally.
recordings. None of them have 12 bars.
Totally. Totally.
I mean, I've had this discussion with Steve Weintraub in regard to dance too.
Oh, yeah.
Which is, that, Steve was talking about the fact that, because as I came in, or from the very beginning, I was saying, look, the way the old folks danced, they just, danced to the beat. They didn't pay slavish attention to the phrase length or something. Some people were more tuned into that than others, but, and Steve's take was, well, that's probably a sign of a, what did he call, like a degenerated dance culture or something. And I was like, no. The further back you go in music, let's look at the music of the Renaissance, for example. You've got, two measures of 2 and then a measure of 5 and then one of 3 and et cetera. I'm not sure that that's the same phenomenon at work, but there's something, that's not rigidly symmetrical about all of it.
Cookie and I used to discuss. She loved crooked. I hated crooked. And it just does something to my muggin. I just, I'm coughing, I'm hiccuping. But I understand all of this. It's just not a happy.
Crooked is great. You got to learn to embrace the crookediness. Crooked and twirly, man. Those are the.
Someone needs to make me a banner. Crooked is okay and great.
It's okay. Yeah. Well, Joel writes in the chat, share. Share and share alike. I mean, I don't know whose story this is, and forgive me if I'm misnaming or mislabeling who it comes from, but it may have been from Hankus, and I've seen this. I've seen Susan's chart of the Philly shares that has like all of these little 4-bar sections randomly sprinkled through it, and with the idea being that that's for people to catch up, to so that everybody can finish Shannon and doing their things and get back to wherever they're supposed to be to, and I may be conflating a Hankus and a Sherry story and a Susan story, but so anybody.
But I think also, a lot of them have, that whole kind of shout chorus thing is like, it probably, if the gesture is like, bow to your partner, curtsy to your partner kind of thing, da-da-dum, 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 and you're off.
Right.
Right. Well, I think that you have to figure if this is folk music and it was used to dance, and somebody, if they made a mistake, they weren't gonna stop and say, "Oh my God, you skipped a bar." They were just gonna continue. And I think for a robust culture, the dancing had to be able to accommodate that. Because not everybody who was playing the music was necessarily a concert performer. So it's an organic thing, and I agree with you, Michael, that does represent a sort of more organic, earlier kind of thing, not a degenerated thing at all.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. We're running up to 4:00 Eastern time. So unfortunately we have to start drawing our conversation to a close. I'm going to let everybody have a last word if they'd like to have one. And Clara is going to speak. For myself, I would like to thank Paul Gifford and Sherry and Jeff Wollock and Michael Aylward for being such wonderful conversants for this incredible series. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you. I hope that this is not the end, but that we'll get to do this again periodically as more things come to light, and as more topics sort of rise to the surface that we feel like we want to talk about. And so I'd also like to thank them. I'd like to thank all of you who are here today for coming. It's great to have you in these conversations. And let us know if you're as an audience or as a discussant, if there's something that you want to hear more about or have us talk about, let us know, and we'll see if we can convene that conversation at some point in the future. So I'm going to turn it over to Clara, who has a brief announcement, and then we'll have some concluding thoughts from everybody if they like. Go ahead, Clara.
Yeah, so as you know, this is the last session for this series. Likely there will be another one next fall. But this concluding session is a pre-Yiddish New York event, supported by Yiddish New York and CTMD also. So I want to remind you to register for Yiddish New York if you haven't. There are many people in the room here who are playing or presenting. And if you have any questions about registration, please feel free to email me at ynycoordinator@gmail.com, and I'll put the link here in the chat.
Yeah, I will also add for those of you, like I've been talking about this Kisselhoff collection, and Klezmer Institute, we're going to be running 2 different kinds of sessions about Kisselhoff material this year at Yiddish New York. So I'm going to take a moment, personal plug. One of them is a play along. It's going to be an intro play along session. So if you you've heard about this Kisselhoff stuff, you haven't gotten your feet wet yet, this will be a great chance to sort of get a sense of what's in the collection. I'll be running sessions where there'll be a PDF available ahead of time, and we can just sit and play along and talk about tunes. And then the other one is going to be more of like a lecture format, where we'll be examining different components of the repertoire. Some will be in conversation with Zev, some will be we're going to do a session on the liturgical material that's inside of the collection. For those of you who are interested in the text and more religious side of things, Gabriel Zuckerberg and Sarah Meyerson are going to run that session. So if you want to hear more what's up with Kisselhoff, Yiddish New York sessions are a great place to get your feet wet with that collection. Okay, and so Jeffrey, Sherry, Paul, Michael, anything you'd like to say to send us off?
Well, I'll just say, if anybody wants to know more about what's in the collection, or wants to see the database, or wants access to any of the tunes that maybe haven't been digitized yet, please contact me. I'll put my email again in the chat, and I'm always happy to share and nerd out about all this stuff.
Yay. Great.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
In that case, yes, I'd just like to thank you for the opportunity for these recent meetings, and I'm still learning, so bear with me. And I put my email into the chat about half an hour ago. Did everyone get it, or shall I put it in again? No.
I think we've got it, and I will be sending out to all of you who are here one final round of emails that will give you a link to a Google folder that has all of the music we listened to today, plus all of the music we listened to for Jeffrey's talk, and some of the music that we didn't listen to for Jeffrey's talk, and some of the music that we didn't listen to today as a playlist. There'll be a summary of the chat with all of the links and all of that stuff. And I'll also make sure that you all of you who are here today have access to the 3 previous folders that have music material in them. So you'll get a chance to listen to all of the new Belfs and all of this glorious music that all of our friends here have shared over the course of this last 2 months.
Could
All right,
I,
go ahead, Adrienne.
could I just ask for a future mini discussion of, it's been on my mind about the balance of when you redo the recording, yes, it's so wonderful to hear the bass line and but I would like to know how close to reality it was, and how that person that you mentioned that does all the work for you, Sherry, how he made those decisions, and is it sort of like a desire of what we want to hear, because we work with this balance issue all the time, and I'm wondering if we've created a desirable listening experience rather than an actual reality.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
I think the first thing you have to realize is that the recording situation itself was extremely artificial and on extremely primitive equipment. So you're not getting, there's no way you're actually getting, what it's, we don't even know if this, for Bell, for example, is that the whole band? I mean, probably not. And did they use a piano back in the shtetl? Probably not. So, I mean, like, this is like a recording version of probably of the band. And sometimes you hear that it's different because you can hear them being spaced differently towards the horn. So it's really hard there's almost no answer to that question. I mean, we want to be able to hear as much as possible of what they're doing. Definitely.
So that's really the point. Then.
Yeah.
Well,
And
that's how.
There's one other thing though I want to say. A very important question is the actual playing speed. And I mean, I think we can talk about that. I know that Kurt, who's unfortunately hasn't been able to attend these sessions, has done some important research on this over the past year. And there's something that I would say that's very interesting on the Russian side. If anybody, Russian records, they have a gizmo which is very, very good, which is that you can actually change the speed. You can adjust the speed on the playback. So like that is very important because I think there's going to be debates about this for a long time. And it's not, in other words, they did not use a standard speed. We know that, we know this, there was no standard speed in those days. It was somewhere around 78, but it was really like 78 plus or minus. Michael knows more about it than I do, but at least 4, probably more, more than that. Right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. So like, and we know it really can sound quite different if it's even just a little bit faster or a little slower, because it isn't only the speed, it's also the timbre of the instruments. Did Belf really sound like sometimes you hear Belf, it sounds really squeaky, very high. Did he really sound like that? Because there was other things where he doesn't. He sounds much more normal. So, I mean, we can't talk about that now, but that is a big question.
Let me just say 2 things. First, Adrian, as Chris mentioned, he was on my session and I asked him to explain what he does. And basically he goes for intelligibility, and for things like the Belf recordings, he's gotten it a little bit off according to what you might expect. But some of it was because certain things are sort of more immutable than others, like the piano and stuff. So he's kind of geared towards that, but always intelligibility is his criterion. And with respect to reality, I mean, the larger question is, do you feel you have to replicate the key and so forth and the speed of what you hear on a recording, or is it enough to internalize the tune and then make it your own? Because different instruments are going to play things in different places. Like there are certain tunes I can't play in certain keys because I'd have to drop down an octave, in the middle of the line. And, do I want to be faithful or do I want to play the tune well? So, that's another whole question and matter for debate for a different time.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was good to say reality versus the other word you used.
Intelligibility.
Yes, intelligibility, right. That's an
There's
important distinction for me.
There's an interesting, different kind of music, but there was a reissue of a bunch of Charlie Poole recordings where one disc is sort of a very direct transfer from the 78 without a lot of mediation. And then it's the same exact album that's been very much sort of digitally cleaned up. And so you can listen side by side, track for track, and sort of hear what you can pull out of the original that you kind of lose when it's been amended in certain ways. Another thing last thing I would mention is that, I used to listen to the 78s in John's collection on a 1970s Dynaco tube amplifier from a kit, with tube speakers. And even the scratchiest of the 78 sounded great on that. But when we transferred them and made them and then started listening to on my old laptop, like they were, incomprehensible. It was so scratchy because of the way the speakers reproduced, so like that's yet another thing that we have to account for is what are we reproducing these sounds on and how good at reproducing the sounds are they, and particularly if we're in danger of alienating people and losing them because it's too scratchy, So that's like another factor of the conversation is like how we keep people. I mean, fortunately, what Chris does is incredible because he's really pulling the music out, and like the discs that Michael has had access to are these pristine, you know, pristine discs that have hardly been played. So, but in any case, to be continued. So thanks to everybody. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks.
And we'll see you next year. We'll see you soon enough, but next year will be archives in focus. I think we're going to talk to a bunch of archivists. So
Bye-bye.
thanks a lot. We'll see you
Thank
next
you.
time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Okay.